All right, so a quick outline for this project. I will go over the background and history on pipe backfill details and the frost heaving issues that have occurred, along with some recommendations for the future. And then Melissa will present on the percent within limits SP, along with some other project components that were completed on the North Dakota 1 and North Dakota 17 project. So a quick background and timeline for our pipe backfill details. Pre-2008, there was either no detail or various ones used that were just in the plans. In 2008, the detail at that time was made into a standard drawing, and that really hasn't changed that much. You know, the detail out on our website right now, the 714, 25s, and 26s, basically the same as '08. We have made a few changes, but essentially the same one. In 2009, a compaction spec was added for the pipe backfill details, and then in 2010, there's a research project in Fargo District on Highway 27 that incorporated those compaction specs. Fun fact, I was the intern on that project back in '10, kind of dating myself a little bit there, but so I got to run all those hundreds of compaction tests. I would have really liked the E-gauge if you guys, if anyone went to that presentation yesterday, that would have been sweet. But it was a lot of work, but we found out that it did work through monitoring those pipes. We had very little post-construction settlement on that project and no other issues that showed up. So at that time, kind of assumed that the pipe backfill detail that we had worked and we could use it throughout the state, and then proceeded to do that. In 13 and 14, had several projects that included pipe replacements that got completed on North Dakota 1, 17, and 20 in the Grand Forks and Devils Lake districts. And in the winter after those were built, some very large dips occurred over those pipes. And so in 15, tried some alternative details to try and alleviate some of the large dips that were occurring, and in 16 installed some instrumentation to figure out for sure kind of what was going on at those pipes. And then in spring of 20, we had several new alternative pipe backfill details that were developed that were used that summer on North Dakota 1 and then North Dakota 20, and a result of that, found out some details that seemed to work for some of the frost-heaving soils in the state, and those were used on the North Dakota 1 and 17 project that was completed this past summer in 22. So going back to 13, thought we had a standard pipe backfill detail that worked. Then in the winter of 14, got a call from the Grand Forks district about some rough riding pipes, and that previous year, 2 projects had gone through, and they had replaced over 100 centerline pipes. So went up there for a site visit and found situations like this, where we have a very large dip over the pipe and they rode very rough, and quickly realized that for new pipe installs, probably couldn't just keep using our standard detail. And I don't know if anyone here, I know people from Grand Forks here, back then if you had driven over some of these, they were pretty bad. I'd say they're borderline unsafe. Like if you drive over that at the speed limit, some of them, your head's not hitting the ceiling, but it was pretty bad. I know Ed drove over a lot of them. He had his rule of how much the rebar was flying around in the back of his car. So they were pretty bad, and there was quite a few that were like this. So those dips were occurring. Figured out probably we had some frost-heaving problems going on, and just wanted to do a little background on that. So in order for frost-heaving to happen, you need 3 things. You need freezing temps, which obviously in North Dakota we have. We get cold and stay cold for a long time. This winter is a good example of that. Can have frost depths ranging from 4 to 8 feet, depending on where you are. You need silty and sandy soils, which are present in many areas of the state, especially in the north central and northeast. And you need a water source at or near the frost line, which some parts of our state have a pretty elevated water table. Also, the prairie pothole region of the state is wet, and many of the pipes are installed in wet areas. So as temperatures decrease, you have a capillary action that occurs in silty and sandy soils, where if there's a water source close to the frost line, that water is sucked up into the soil above, and when this water freezes, it causes ice lenses to form, and then those will expand and cause the soil to heave. And so this is a diagram that kind of shows those different situations that can occur. So you got column A. You have a freezing soil, but you have no water source. So it's only freezing the existing water in the material, and it's going to heave some, but those ice lenses are small. It's not going to heave enough to cause big issues. Column B, we have a freezing soil with a water source. And so due to that capillary action that happens, so the water essentially, you can imagine, just like it just gets sucked up into the soil once it starts to freeze. And then that causes larger ice lenses to form. And then this can cause a significant amount of heave. And so this is a good example of what is happening outside the pipe backfill detail that have a water source. Column C is what happens when you have a water source, but like a gravel layer, like our class 5 or class 3, that is used as part of the pipe backfill detail that cuts off the water source to the above layer, so that capillary action doesn't happen as much. There's not enough suction to suck the water, through 3 feet of gravel essentially to get up into the soils above. So you have a situation where it's really just freezing that water above the gravel layer. It's not very much, small ice lenses, and so you have a difference here. With the pipe backfills, you got situation C happening right over the pipe, and outside of that detail, you got a situation B, so you got a big differential between them. So here's just a quick diagram of what is happening at the pipes. You got the roadway on both sides heave, while the roadway directly above the pipe stays in the same spot. And this example, I think this is the deep pipe backfill detail, so 71426, I think. So in fall of 15, tried several new details on 17 and 20 based on what was kind of known at that time. So we know we got heaving going on outside the pipe backfill, not a whole lot right by the pipe. The idea was just to reduce that amount of gravel to just what the pipe manufacturers required, and to try to lengthen out those gravel transitions to transition the frost heave. And overall, this detail worked pretty good. We had variations of this as well, and many of you guys have seen that maybe in some of your plans, but wasn't perfect. Felt like we could still do something better moving forward. So in addition to trying some new pipe backfill details, in order to find out for sure what was causing issues at the pipe, we installed some instrumentation in the winter of 16 at 3 locations on North Dakota 1, 66, and 81. And these were at known locations of frost heaving. So this is detail showing that instrumentation that was placed. So we did install thermistors, piezometers, and deformation meters. Thermistors measure the temperature of the soil so we can tell how deep the frost is going. Piezometers will tell you where the water table is at, and then the deformation meters will measure movement. So the idea was to install some of the instrumentation inside the pipe backfill detail, so where the gravel's at, so really like right next to the pipe, and then some outside of it so you can know what's going on within the detail and then what's going on outside of it as well. So what the instrumentation and monitoring told us, kind of what we thought was happening based on what we saw in the field, was that the frost heaving was for sure happening, and it was occurring a lot more outside the pipe back detail than within. So this is a graph showing 2 surveyed points, so one right over the pipe and then one like 50 feet away. So 1 point within that gravel envelope, 1 outside of it, and taking the differential between them. And so as you can see, once it gets cold, that differential gets pretty big, right? And then as the summer comes, the heave comes out, it's basically the same. So it just kind of shows that soil outside the pipe backfill heaving up and down with the winter months. So also, here's a graph showing the results of the deformation meters. The deformation meters measure movement of the soil. And so the red line is a deformation meter installed right at the pipe, and the purple is a deformation meter installed outside the pipe backfill detail. So as you can see, soil at the pipe basically not moving, but outside of that, that's heaving quite a bit. It's in the winter months, and I think we had heave on this one about 2 inches, and we've seen heaving up there close to 5 inches as well. So this one was not heaving quite as bad, but still happening. Here's another deformation meter output, where once again, the red is the deformation meter by the pipe, and the purple is outside the pipe backfill. And from this graph, this is a situation where both the pipe and the embankment were heaving. So, and the pipe didn't necessarily like go back down to the same elevation once it warmed up, as in it stayed up. There's also quite a bit of heave at this location. We had almost 5 inches here. And so this situation is actually an equalization pipe, and it's pretty shallow, where The pipe is shallow, along with a water source right there, and that existing soil underneath is forming frost lenses, and so the pipe is moving up. There's still a dip in the winter because the embankment is heaving more. But then in the summer, in a situation like this, you can actually have like a bump because the pipe stayed up, similar to what we see in the fields, right? Gets cold, rocks move up, stay up. You got to keep rock picking all the time, at least in Minnesota where I'm from. So this time, understood what was happening at the pipes, had instrumentation to back up our theories and also confirmed what was being observed in the field. We had tried some of those alternative pipe backfill details in 15, not perfect, wanted to try some more stuff. Also wanted to monitor those things and make sure what we were trying was working. So worked with the Grand Forks, Devils Lake districts in the winter of 19 and 20, came up with several new details to try to be installed on North Dakota 20 and 1 in the summer of 2020. And wanted to find two solutions. You know, we don't want to have to go back and rip out all the pipe that are having frost-heaving issues. You know, that disturbs the traveling public. It's expensive, takes a long time. But we also so we wanted to find a solution for existing pipes that are frost-heaving, but then also obviously for new pipes that are going to be installed in frost-heaving soils. So here are two examples of the new pipe backfill detail that was used. So main difference here from the other one was that we just wanted to really spread that aggregate section out. So the manufacturers are going to require some aggregate around the pipe policy as well. That's what the details are kind of formed on to kind of work for steel and concrete pipe at the same time. So you need that aggregate, but it's causing issues. So we decided, you know, you just got to lengthen that out. It's more aggregate, but we were hoping that it would transition that frost heave better. Because when you get a thinner amount of aggregate, we found, you know, that capillary action can still happen. It's just at some point it's too thick, it can't suck the water through, and then you're not going to have heaving. So just wanted to transition that better. We also tried some with all aggregate backfill and some with the native backfill as well. For the pipes with native backfill, the embankment used either had to be Common X, so what came out of the trench, or the contractor had to go find some soil that matched what was in the trench. Thought was we didn't want to introduce a different soil than what was around it. Otherwise, you know, we might be, you know, it's going to react different to frost heaving. So for the details to address existing pipes, we also tried what we call a deep patch pipe on each side and then replacing it with layers of grit and gravel. Class 5. The idea here is to help reduce that sharp dip next to the pipe and then transition out that frost heave. Geogrid was used to provide some structural support to smooth out the heave right around the trench, and so to help span that abrupt dip at the pipe. Because a lot of the other old details, you know, they have that vertical trench. It's like 2 or 3 feet down, so it was very abrupt at that point. So the thought was that the grid would kind of help, hopefully, keep kind of transition that really sharp heave that was right at that vertical trench. And so we came up with this one to try kind of some different depths there, 2 and 3 feet for pipes that were frost heaving that we didn't want to have to dig out. So here are some of the results of how the new details performed. The district completed surveys on the pipe right after construction and then continued through the fall and winter into the next summer. So this detail is one that was a new pipe install and all used aggregate as an all aggregate backfill. So this is showing the survey done at 40 feet on each side of the pipe and then right over the pipe. And it's showing the difference between those survey shots, so measuring the differential. Red line is the initial survey, so the finished roadway profile. Green line is survey from the winter, and you can see the roadway heaving up with the pipe kind of basically staying still. And then the blue line is a summer survey, 1 year after construction, and then heave comes out. So this detail rode pretty good. We just went up there last week. Not perfect, but it transitions in and out. You can feel it. There is going to be a dip, and we kind of understand that. You're not going to get rid of frost heaving unless you replace all the soils, which is not economical. But you can ride it at the posted speed limit, and we felt like this worked good. Also, I can say this pipe was constructed very well. You can see like there's no post-construction settlement or very little between the two summer surveys. So here's another result. This is one of the aggregate patches, so those deep patches. Once again, you have your initial shown by the red line. The green line shows a survey in the winter, roadway heaves up, and then the blue line is a survey done in the summertime, so 1 year after construction, and the heave comes back down. Once again, like no post-construction settlement, because like if you have a dip already over your pipe, it's going to make things a lot worse, right? You already have a dip. Outside's going to heave up, and it's going to cause that issue to be just that much worse. So once again, this one I would say, I was talking to Ed last week, I thought this one probably rode the best of a lot of them. Very smooth, and so we like this a lot and feel like that patch can work for pipes, for existing pipes, so you don't have to replace the whole thing. So, in summary, feel confident that we have some pipe backfill details that can address the frost-heaving soils in our state if they are constructed properly. Proper compaction control is key to reduce any post-construction settlement. Also, the paving transitions have to be done correctly in order to ensure a good ride, and so that essentially we don't have a dip when we're done with the pipe, because we're going to have a problem probably later. We can't stop the frost heave. It's going to happen, but we can transition it and make sure you can drive over it at the speed limit. Details that did not ride as well either had post-construction settlement, bad paving transitions, or both. For existing pipe that are exhibiting frost heaving issues, recommend a simple survey is completed that consists of a survey shot over the pipe and also 50 feet away, once in the summer, once in the winter, so you can tell if it's settlement, if it's heaving, or if it's both. And then we can, some of the settlement issues you can get rid of with a mill and overlay, obviously. But if it's heaving, then we can do that deep aggregate patch over the pipe and fix them. And for new pipes, pipe backfill detail depends on where they are in the state and what kind of soils are present. Current standard backfill details, we still use those a lot. They do work in certain parts of the state. And so it's just kind of where you are and what kind of soils are there. And then one situation that we know is happening that we haven't found a detail for yet, working on it, is those shallow pipes where the pipe itself is actually moving up and heaving and not always returning back. But we plan to hopefully get some projects and install those, install some instrumentation, and try a couple ideas that we have with those. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Melissa to talk about the percent within limits and other project components on the North Dakota 1 and 17 projects.
All right. Thanks, Jared. Before I start, we do a lot of talking at these conferences about planning and design and technology and things like that, and that's all fantastic. But I don't know about all you, but I sure appreciated the maintenance folks that got us all here today. So if you join me in a round of applause for them, thank you for keeping us safe. Appreciate that. So by show of hands, how many people here are maintenance? Thank you. But pass that on to those folks who aren't here. How many are field staff? Okay, a few. How many design? How many administration? Okay, so we got a mix. We'll try and tailor this a little bit. I know all of you are really excited about statistics, and so we'll try and stay a little bit away from that part of the discussion. But this project wasn't really just a mill and overlay. It had a lot of the new SPs incorporated on it, so a lot of the new technology that's out there. We want to talk about those a little bit today, but more focus on PWL and what it is and how it's changed construction and inspection practices for us, but also how that relates to the design side and why we do it, why taking the extra effort to do this is a good idea. So we'll get into each of those. That project itself, all the different SPs that were incorporated for just a mill and overlay project. We had e-ticketing, which I'm sure you've all heard lots about, so we won't focus a lot on that today. The longitudinal joint density SP, which is a great thing. That's helped keep a lot of our center lines in better shape over time. The ride quality, again, you've heard lots about that, so we won't focus on that today, but we had that SP as well. We had the paver-mounted thermal profiler, intelligent compaction, and percent within limits. So we had a lot of things to keep track of on this project that all are surprisingly well interrelated in how that pavement will perform over time and what benefits the user in the end. I want to thank Kurt Dunn for providing the information contained on this slide. This is a good example of how thermal imaging and intelligent compaction can really help identify the things that are going on in our pavements. So as field staff, we keep track of all this stuff as we go. But really, what is it telling us? And this is just one example of what it can tell us. You see on the left hand of the slide up there is just a summary of some of the core densities from a particular day of paving. And you see in red, there was only one that fell outside the lower specification limit of 92% on this project, which is still high, right? If you think of the old 430 spec, 88% is where we start, remove and replace or remedial action. So this was still up close to that 92, but why did that happen? Look at all the others, 94, 95, 96, great compaction all day. When you line up all these technologies that we had going on the project, look at the thermal profile on the top, the breakdown roller, the intermediate roller, the mat temp. We have one spot where everything kind of changes a little bit and all that imaging and what happened. Aha, that's where the paver stopped. Okay? You can use this as a representative function of your entire project. You have that one core that happened there. But you take all that data at the end of your project, you look at it, you can tell what's going on your pavement on a representative basis. And so why do we do this? Why do we spend all that extra time looking at this data and implementing it, having the contractors go through that effort? This is why. Because those cores we only have every lot, every sublot. This can tell us on a representative basis what's going on in our pavement and how we can see that on a project-wide basis without having to, turn our pavement into Swiss cheese. So there's lots of other good presentations out there on these technologies as well. We won't spend a lot of time on these particular ones today, but really want to point out the usefulness of this data and the benefit of implementing these SPs on our projects as well. Today, I want to focus more on that percent within limits, SP. Yeah. I'm so sorry. Better? Okay. Actually, we'll hold it. There we go. Everybody knows I'm a loudmouth anyway. So, in talking about percent within limits, again, one of the bigger things with it is since it is more effort for us, why do we bother doing it? And that's partly, easily explained by that old adage of, the past, the present, and the future walked into a bar, and it got really tense. All you English majors out there, I know you love that one, right? But really, we don't just do things the way we always have. We're constantly looking to better these things and implement new technology. But is it worth the effort, and why do we do it? So what's the old way? The old way is the current 430 spec, right? Where you core the pavement periodically throughout the day. You have a core for every sublot, and that's every 1,000 feet of a paver width. You take the average of your core densities at the end of the day, and that's your compaction portion of your contract price adjustment. You, of course, have your aggregate and your asphalt adjustments as well. But at the end of the day, that's how you do it. So, you have your lot, your sublot definition, pretty simple to do. Works great. Simple calculation. DOT's paving workbook is a great tool for that. Takes care of a lot of the math for you. Enter your data in, it spits out your compaction factors, no problem. It's a great way to do things. Contractor is out there compacting the pavement, doing his roller passes, and they get higher density, they get awarded for that. It's a great way to look for that. But why not do that then? Well, it's a lot of cores for one thing. We looked at ways to provide technology that tells us what's going on in our pavement on a representative basis. PWL can help us with that. And also, you can have high density, but maybe it's not that uniform. So here comes PWL, percent within limits. And this particular SP was this number. Yours might be a little different depending on your project if you have it. But what's the difference here? You still take your cores. You still calculate your pavement densities off of those cores, but there's also a specified range in there that a certain percent have to be within 92 and 97% of your average or your maximum theoretical density. Aggregate gradation and asphalt content factors stay the same, but now you've got PWL instead of compaction. You got 2 cores per sublot, but your sublot's different. Instead of 1,000 feet of paver, it's 900 tons. That complicates things a little bit though. So say, for example, on a particular day of paving on this project, if you operated under the old 430 spec, we did just short of 17,000 feet of paving that day. We would have had 17 cores out there. We only needed 6 for the PWLSP, the way the lots are set up. This really promotes pavement uniformity. And, courtesy of Amy Bisey from Materials and Research, The overall rule of thumb is that if you get a % average density increase, you got 10% more service life. Well, what a great thing to have for us when, you know, dollars are tight and we have a big road network, right, for lower population. So that's a great benefit to us. What's the downside? You could have a disincentive for higher compaction if it's not as uniform. We actually had that happen on our project. I'll show you that example here in a little bit. And the other thing is, it's more complicated. You don't just average out the densities and plug it into, you know, take it off a table and off you go. There's more to it than that. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the actual calculation of it today because, again, I know we all love statistics and everything like that, but the procedure is actually spelled out right in the SP. So these slides will be available later too, but you can actually find this formula right in your SP, so keep that in mind. But at the end of the day, you calculate that density. There you would have been done. Now you got to calculate the standard deviation, the upper and lower quality limits, the PU and PL, so the percent within limits values, the quality level, the PWL pay factor. Okay, so one thing that was really helpful for us in implementing that is understanding what that really meant. So at the end of the day, this particular day, we had 6 cores that day. Calculate the average of them. Average was just under 94%, not too bad, right? I mean, there's a lot of extra quality control that goes into this on the contractor side. Here's the part that's kind of important though. How much did they deviate from each other? So we calculated the standard deviation of those cores, 1.35 standard deviations. Again, not too bad. It's within that goal, so that's fantastic. Upper and lower quality limits based on the mean and the standard deviation, but here's where your SP comes in. You want to have every core within 92% to 97%. This is where that comes in. So you have your upper and lower quality limits that are calculated based on those specifications as well. This table is also from the special provision based on those values. You take your number of cores, you find that in the vertical column, and then your percent within limits are found by finding your quality levels. Here's the important part, go up if it's in the middle. And then you go off to the left of the chart, and that'll give you your percent within upper limits and percent within lower limits. So the quality level, you take those two things, add them together, subtract 100. In this case, we had a quality level of 95. Then the pay factor, you take half of that, and you add it to 55. So 103, we had a 1.03 pay factor for PWL. Long way to get there, right? Here's the easy way to look at it, okay? So on this graph, the distribution of the core densities is shown. The lower specification limit of 92% is on the left blue line. The upper specification limit of 97% is the right blue line. And as you can see, that one core that we talked about earlier fell below that. So you can see the bottom of that curve on the left-hand side falling outside that a little bit. Easy representation of that. There is hope. There is help. The DOT, again, has a great tool for us in the paving workbooks. You can still use them for PWL. You just have to really kind of understand how they work, right? And the key there is that there's 2 things that can happen with PWL, with the change in the lots and how they're defined. You can either have a lot in one day, or you can have it where it spans more than one day. And so you all are probably familiar, if you've worked with a paving project, with the daily report. And so on the left, if you enter all your data in, it'll tell you what your aggregate adjustment factor is. And on the right, at the top, it'll tell you what your AC payment factor is and your compaction payment factor. We can still use this document for PWL. But on the summary tab, there's a little tab at the bottom. You got to toggle that to PWL. That's step 1. It's got to know not to just spit out the average density in the lookup table, right? So you toggle that. And then over in the compaction factor, it will tell you instead of density factor, here's your PWL factor. It'll do that for you. That's great. What's wrong with that? Aha. Based on a lot in one day. So how do we deal with that? Not a problem. You just have a daily workbook and a PWL workbook. So if you have 3 days, you pave 1,000 tons each, you need a 2,700 ton lot, okay? So you can use the individual workbooks from day 1, day 2, and day 3, just as you would normally do them, to get your aggregate and AC pay factors, no problem. Then at the end of that, when you get your full lot, you put all your cores into that workbook, and there's where you get your PWL factor. So you have to combine that set of tools in order for it to work properly. So just be aware of that. So what good has that done us? Seems like a lot, right? Well, it has done some good. And again, Amy Bisey from Materials and Research provided some historical information on other projects besides this one. So if you look at the purple line on this slide here, what that is the results from the density on the old FAA 43. I shouldn't say old, it's still used sometimes. But there it is. And if you look at the average density there, we're looking at 92.7, so still not too bad, right? But the spread of that is a little more, if you look at the shapes of those curves. So these other projects in the red and green, Christmas projects, right? They represent projects where the PWLSP was implemented. And so if you look at those, the average density is higher. The standard deviation is closer together. The one is actually right about the same, but projects that have come after that too. The shape of that curve is narrower. You get more consistent pavement with a higher average density. And in this particular case, it is about that percent. So look at that. We're gaining 10% service life by doing this. It's worth it. It's a few extra steps, but there's a benefit to it. There's a reason that we're doing it. A couple of things that can be counterintuitive, though. You wouldn't think it could happen, but we actually had some real good compaction on our project. And between 2 days of paving, one day had a higher average core density than the other, but had a lower pay factor. Why did that happen? Because we actually had core densities that were above the upper specification limit. Great problem to have, right? But a little counterintuitive. We comb through that stuff like something must be wrong here, right? But it can happen. And the goal here, again, is consistency. So it can be a little counterintuitive. And what does that look like when you plot those out? You can see it happen. So on August 5th, when we paved, the shape of that curve is great. It's uniform, high average density. It's great, but some of it's outside the specification limit. That's what happened there. So the next day, again, great compaction still, average, between 94 and 95. Great results. But look how uniform it is, and look how it's between the lower and upper specification limit. That's what we're after by this spec. We also took a look at how it correlated with ride quality. Didn't see a lot of direct correlation there, but again, it's relatively new, and I think over time it'd be something worth exploring, how this can help us, having more uniform pavement, have better ride and more consistent ride on our project. So I think that's something worth looking into. So at the end of the day, there is a difference in what we're doing when we implement this percent within limits SP as opposed to the 430 spec. We change our incentive to the contractor to be less based on average density and more based on uniformity and high density. We've reduced our number of cores, which is great for our roadways, and still get representative information, especially implementing some of these other technologies to correlate that back to our roadway. Keep in mind, with the PWL, you can have a higher average density, but a lower pay factor. That's okay. That's okay. And the historical results have told us that this is worth it. We are gaining compaction overall, and we are gaining service life in our roadways. So I think it's very worthwhile. So with that, I'd invite Jared back up. You said you were going to be gone, but I couldn't let you do it. And if anybody has questions for either of us, feel free. Go ahead.
Yes, there was some of the, we did some moisture testing as well. You're talking like in the subgrade itself. Yes, we did consider that as well, but it seemed to be more of a, when we had that water source, everything was a little wetter, but that temperature dependent, it also kind of depends on the year, right? You're gonna get a little more frost even when it's colder. What we really saw was those thermistors with the temps, that right at the aggregate, it just drove that frost a lot deeper. It was very significant, a couple feet, and the temperatures got a lot colder, which was kind of driving it more. But the water obviously is important as well for frost heaving with that water source. Is that? That is correct. So the whole road is like column A, but some areas are a lot worse because of that silty, and that's what you see. Like we call them frost heaves, but you have parts on the roads all over, not all over, but you got signs, random yellow signs, right? That don't seem to. They're like they're in like cut fill transitions randomly. Those are areas where there's just a little more heave happening because of the silty soils and water stuff. At these locations, I would say the frost heave was a bigger problem, but settlement did come into play because if you already have, say, a tenth of settlement, then you get a tenth of heave. Now you're probably gonna have a problem. It's gonna ride rough. So both, but I would say the really bad ones, the heave was more of a problem.
Excuse me. That's a little hard to tell at this point because unfortunately a lot of the PWL implementation has come in at the same time as the rising oil prices. So we have seen some of that, but can't really quantify, to my knowledge at this time, if that's attributable to that or not. A lot of the QCQA that the contractor does is already there in the requirements there. So I would say there's probably a little bit just with the extra administrative effort. I don't know if there's any contractors in the audience that might like to speak to that a bit, but. Fair answer. Yep. All right. I'll hand it back to Jesse here.
All right. Thank you, Jared. Thank you, Melissa. Tell the. Yeah.